So the first thing is to welcome you here and say thank you for coming. We didn't know who was coming, but we're going to record the session just in case and put it on the website of the Olivier. Quentin, who is our filmer, is making the move. Right, I'll sit here. It's going to be a varied programme today, and we'll finish by 1, so you get to eat. Before I forget, the loos, if you need loos or toilets, are through that door, or immediately out there on the right. There are several loos in this church. If you want to help yourself to anything to eat or drink, it's in just outside the door there. Feel free to get up and serve yourselves if you want to, either now or later. Now, as regards languages, it's complicated. I will speak English. The members of the team here on my right, who I'll introduce to you in a second, will speak French. So if you have any need for interpretation, we have Ariel and Julie who are interpreting for us today, both freshman interpreters. So if you need to, ask them for a headset and a receiver. Jean and Christophe will be using those because they don't speak much English. So if you need them, don't hesitate to go and grab one now. Hello. You get to sit at the front. It's like coming to church. You have to sit at the front of the late. But you can have a programme. Here you are. So if you've got any problem with French if you're English speakers, or a problem with English if you're French speakers, I say devices are available and you can just listen to the interpretation. But go and grab one now, I would recommend. Are you okay with French? No, in that case, my spouse will help you out. So you put the earpiece over your ear, from the top of the ear, not the bottom, from the top. That's right, put it over the ear, and just turn your device on with the button. So let me introduce the team of the Olivier, and then I'll explain to you what and who is it working okay? Good. What and who the Olivier is. These people here are our core team. Natalia Macari, who want to stand up. Really. Natalia is a social worker, and she works for the Olivier representing us in the CIRE, which is an umbrella organisation of NGOs which help migrants, and she'll explain to you later what we do and what they do. In the middle we have Christophe. Tu peux te lever, Christophe, pour qu'il te voit? Christophe is our full-time jurist. Christophe is Rwandan, and he himself knows what it means to be a migrant and a refugee because, of course, he comes from a country which has had a lot of upheavals in the last few decades. I'll leave it to him to mention that if he wants to. So he's our full-time jurist. He will take the cases as they come in and deal with most cases. If the cases involve a lawyer who has to stand up in front of the court to represent the migrants concerned, then you'll pass the case to Jean-Damascène, who is our lawyer. Jean is also Rwandan, and Jean and Christophe have been with us for about 20 years now, and Natalia joined us about 5 years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. And we're all volunteers, but that pretty much goes without saying. So, let me introduce the programme to you as well. I think you've all got a copy, I hope you have anyway. I'm very pleased you're interested, because if people aren't interested, all sorts of things can happen in society that shouldn't happen, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. It's important to be interested, I think, in something which is as delicate and complicated as migration. It's a big dossier, it's been on the agenda for years, and it's not getting any easier, as I'm sure you know. So I'm going to present the Olivier a bit to start with and say what we do, who we are. Then I will start with a brief stock take of what's happening with the current, I've called it the current European asylum and migration crisis, because it is a bit of a crisis. All sorts of terrible things are happening. The world is a mess, and things are not getting any easier. I mean, just recently what happened with the murder of the 2 Swedish people in Brussels, this doesn't help the entire mix of asylum and migration, and it's complicated. Then Christophe and Jean will present a bit of a stock-taken explanation on what's happening currently in Belgium, in asylum, what the difficulties are, what the problems might be, what the government practices are, what the law is, and I've asked them not to make it too technical, because it is extremely technical. And then Natalia will speak about how we sit in the constellation of NGOs who work with migrants in Belgium, both with asylum seekers, migrants, and undocumented migrants. And if you've got any questions, which we like to have at the end, I've tried to allow at least half an hour for questions, because I'm pretty sure you'll have some. It's important to us at the Olivier to have people understand what goes on with migration, because the way I look at it, if you don't know what's going on and what the government is doing, for example, on your behalf, how can you question it? We were talking about this earlier. We had a meeting of the team this morning, and part of the Olivier's raison d'etre is to inform people of the truth of matters, because what you hear in the press isn't always the truth, of course, because it's such a polarised field, asylum and migration. So that's more or less how we hope the session will run. Now I should probably be able to look at my own slide. This is who we are. We're based near the Gare du Midi, and the Olivier's been around for 28 years, 29 years now, because we're called the Olivier in 1996. This is what we actually do. What we do is assist migrants of all sorts. They don't have to be refugees, they don't have to be asylum seekers. Anybody basically who is a foreign national in distress in this country, we will help. For example, we've had British nationals who were fleeing rape in the UK and sexual abuse and came to Belgium to escape from the sexual abuse in their home country. Now, they weren't refugees, they weren't, I suppose they were migrants, but their need was just as acute as that of anybody, because the poor woman concerned was suicidal. She didn't try to commit suicide, and her only salvation was to leave the country and get away from the abuser. So we helped her, but she wasn't a refugee as such. We specialise actually in legal support. That's basically our big USP, that we have our two jurist lawyers who are very specialised in asylum law. It's a complicated sector, asylum law, and it changes all the time. And you may have found this in your own lives, that most lawyers don't know what's going on. And if you have bad legal advice, this could do more harm than good. And very often one of the problems in asylum is that people are badly advised, they make the wrong choices, the wrong decisions, and then any hope they had of obtaining asylum or obtaining a regularised status and a life worthy of that description goes out of the window. So it's very important to have people who know what they're doing. That's what we try and do. We also have a social side to what we do. We have a big network of partners with whom we work to try and solve or lighten any loads. So any problem a person might have, be it heating, lighting, food, and I'll come to that in a second, we try and solve it. We can't always solve every problem, but we do our best. And it's very useful to have a big network, which we do. Then the psychological well-being of people who are in this country and are migrants. Hello. You want to come sit in the front, or we can get you a chair at the back if you like?
I didn't want to disrupt anything.
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
I'll get you a chair. Welcome anyway. I was just explaining what the Olivier does. One of the USPs of the Olivier is that we don't exclude anybody. Now, there are a lot of NGOs in Belgium that work with migrants, but almost all of them, I would say about 92% of them, only help documented migrants. They only give support to people whose stay in Belgium is already regularised. Now that to me is a bit of a paradox, because those who need help most are people who have no paperwork. They're illegals, they're undocumented migrants, and no one wants to help them in it's a vicious circle, because the more unofficial you are and the less of a status you have, the more things you are excluded from. And that's not, in our way of thinking, that's not acceptable. So we tend to specialise in people who are right on the margins, not out of philosophy maybe, but because those are the ones who need help most. Now, one of the things which this entails is being financially independent. Because if as an NGO in Belgium you receive assistance from the government, either regional government or the federal government, your hands are tied and you're not allowed to help undocumented migrants. You can understand the logic, because the government doesn't want undocumented migrants. But we therefore remain independent, which means we only function thanks to donations from people who want to help us. Now that's not a plea for money, I'm not asking for that, although some people get it from our donors of ours, but it means that we maintain our independence and we can help people who the government would not let us help if we were receiving official funding. It makes it harder for us, but it means we can do what we feel we need to do. It's fairly basic stuff at the bottom of the slide there. That's just a quote from the Bible, which means that people who are hungry and thirsty and lonely and isolated, they're people who we want to help. On the left, you've got a little diagram which shows what I call the ecosystem of the Olivier. You probably can't read it from there, but it shows all the various services that gravitate around the centre of the Olivier. Legal service, social service, providing food, and in a second I will talk about our links with this church, Holy Trinity, and with the community kitchen, which is represented by Gail, who is its boss, sitting at the back of the room there. And I'll explain to you maybe the significance of those two cupboards in the corner. Thank you. I was a great believer in the Abbé Pierre. You may have heard of the Abbé Pierre. I was his personal interpreter, because I'm an interpreter by training. And I think the man was wonderful. And he said that. He said that you have to work, if you're serious about helping human suffering, and you're serious about making the world a fairer place, then you have to work upstream, which means changing the system, making it fairer and better, and also work downstream. If someone's hungry today, there's no point in saying we're going to lobby the government so you can get fed in 6 months' time, because they'll be dead in 6 months' time. So you have to work immediately and also upstream. And we have an eye to the future, which is where Natalia comes in, representing us in the CIRE, because the CIRE is the biggest organisation in Belgium to lobby the government, to push the government, to be an interlocutor of the government, to draft fairer asylum procedures, etc., etc. So both those things are very important to us. We're all volunteers, and done that already. We've already mentioned all that, that's fine. Whoops, that's not fine, we'll have them there. Help. So our statutes, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, say that we aim to do everything possible to contribute to the integration of foreigners into Belgian society. Now, that's something Christophe is very keen on, because we don't see ourselves as in opposition to the government. We don't say, the government wants this, we want that. Now, it's true, we don't always want the same thing. But it's in our interest, it's in the migrants' interests, and it's in the government's interest for everyone to be integrated into society. And as you obviously know, because you're thinking, breathing human beings, one of the main problems in today's society, in Belgium and elsewhere, is there isn't integration. There's them and us. And that can only lead to bad conclusions. So we really, really try very hard to find a way to integrate each and every beneficiary who comes to us into society, either regularising their stay in some way, advising them in a way in which they can acquire a status, not just for their benefit, but for the benefit of society. Because if society in Belgium can bring in migrants who have skills, like doctors, for example, who have to flee their own countries very often, they're among the first to have to flee, doctors are, and nurses, it's to the benefit of everybody. So we're very keen. We don't want to push people into their clandestinity. Is that an English word? Clandestinity? Anyway, you know what I mean. we want to bring them out of that situation. And so we always do our very best to provide the best advice and walk alongside them to get them back into society, which helps everybody. This is something which concerns this church very directly. That's a picture of the hallway just outside, because one of the things the Olivier does is run a food bank. Basically, it's on behalf of Holy Trinity, because Holy Trinity funds this food bank and provides the premises. And you all know, I'm sure, from listening to the radio or maybe from your own experience, that in the world we live in today, lots of people are having to have recourse to food banks because they can't afford to feed their children or feed themselves. So the food bank we run every week is basically this. We use donations of food which come into Holy Trinity to the community kitchen that Gail runs. There's EU food aid which we distribute. We have fruit and vegetables, all this in collaboration with Holy Trinity, which is a wonderful thing. Whoops, there's another example of what we're giving out to people. This is every Monday, and there's an increasing number of people coming in, Belgian nationals, Ukrainians, people of all sorts of different statuses. Hello.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. You're warned you'll be a bit late. Now, Hilary doesn't need interpreting, I don't think, do you?
What?
You're okay with French, aren't you? Yeah. Right. And this is the community kitchen downstairs, which is preparing food even as we speak, because the community kitchen never sleeps. And this food is distributed, as Gail could explain, to migrants at the humanitarian hub at Tour and Taxi primarily, but we also give out some of this food on Mondays to our beneficiaries. I mentioned this earlier. Now, I'm not asking you for money, okay? I'm not going to refuse it. And some of you already help us. But I pointed out to you that the only way we can remain independent and help people who really need help, who have nothing, and who are banished to the margins of society, is by being financially independent. And it's not easy because, of course, just like any church or any other organisation, we never know how much money we're going to have in a given month. And that makes it rather hard to budget, but that's the way we choose to live, and we don't regret it in any means. Whoops, what happened there? That was weird. Anyway, that's more or less the end of my presentation of the Olivier, and I will move shortly into talking to you about the current migration crisis, if I can just change slightly. What reasons you came here for today. The reasoning behind the session is complicated. It's mainly to let people know what's going on, because from reading the media you won't know what's really going on, and it seems to me that you can't exercise your rights as citizens in this country or voters and say to the government, this is not what we want or this is what we want, unless you know what's going on. And things have really picked up speed recently. There have been a lot of changes in the asylum process in Belgium and every other country in recent years. Jean and Christophe will speak about that in a minute. So we really wanted to inform you and have you ask your questions. So if you came in after the beginning, please ask questions at the end, or even during. Ask questions as and when, because we want to hear you, we don't just want to speak at you. And there'll be things which I imagine you have in your heart which you want to know about, and we want to help you to have answers to those questions. My thing isn't working as it is, right. I thought it's useful to start with some terminology, because one of the problems in this sector is that there are a lot of false terms and false information bandied around, sometimes I think on purpose to muddy the waters, because it's in the interest of quite a lot of people for the asylum system to be something which is too complex and too unclear to get a handle on. So these are very basic terms. A refugee is somebody who's recognised by the UN, by a country, applying to the Geneva Convention according to very strict criteria in the Convention. And if somebody is awarded refugee status, they are a refugee. Of course, the word normally is just used to indicate anybody who's fleeing something terrible, but that's the strict sense of the word refugee. An asylum seeker, even that term doesn't really mean much anymore, because the terminology has changed, and what people request now is not asylum, but international protection. It's a new terminology which Christophe and Jean will talk about. A displaced person is something else again. That's normally somebody who does not leave their own country. Now, you probably know that around 78% of all the people in the world who flee their homes don't cross a border. They remain in the country of origin, somewhere else in that country. And so they are internally displaced persons. Most people fall into that category. The ones we see here in Belgium, for example, are a tiny minority, even though, of course, from the point of view of society and the point of view of the government, it's too many. If we look at undocumented migrants, that's sans-papiers. The word undocumented migrant is a technical term, but these people who have no real status. And there's the ones who I was saying we tend to want to help most, because they have nothing. They have no status, they have no lodgings, they have no hope, they have no perspective for the future. And it's important that we bring them in to the Belgian system so they can end up having a life. Because I often think that if you're a sans-papier, it's a bit like being an animal living in the jungle or the savannah. You spend all your time trying to eat and not be eaten. And that's basically the fate of people who have no status in the country. And that's not a life, if you ask me. It's an existence, but it's not a life. And I think we're made for more than that. And so one of the things we try and do is get people into a situation where they can actually have a life and not simply exist. And even that doesn't always work out, because there are lots of diseases among undocumented migrants. People have difficulty getting mental help. It's something we'll cover a bit later. International protection, I've mentioned, migration is just where people move. An economic migrant, I mean, it's a term which doesn't really mean a great deal. You could say, I'm an economic migrant because I'm British. I came to Belgium to work, so I'm an economic migrant. The difference between me and a sans-papier is that I have money and status, so the government doesn't mind me being here because I'm sort of clean. But I don't think that's an acceptable distinction to make. Regularisation is something which, again, Christophe and Jean will talk about in a minute. If I'm not talking too much, I should be okay. Regularisation is a way of obtaining a status without leaving, going back to your home country and applying for a status from your home country. If somebody who's already in Belgium, the situation might have changed in their home country, their situation might have changed, and there are two main ways in which somebody can have their stay regularised. Christophe and Jean will talk about that. A stateless person is a different category entirely. That's somebody who cannot claim nationality of any country. It may be that their country has disappeared. That's possible. It may be that their own country has refused to recognise them as being a national of that country. So if you're a stateless person, you fall into a very specific category. In some ways, it makes it easier to be a refugee if you're a stateless person, because you cannot be sent anywhere, because no country will recognise you as theirs. And that's perhaps something which Christophe and Jean also could talk about, the impact of being a stateless person. Okay, those are the French terms on the right. That's enough for now, I think. This is the Geneva Convention, which in theory regulates everything that European countries do as regards migration. Belgium's a signatory of the Geneva Convention, and the actual term, the important bit is people owing to a well-founded fear. Now, well-founded is something which you can debate and interpret. How well-founded is your fear of being persecuted for reasons of race is one, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Now, that doesn't overtly cover sexuality, for example. Let's imagine that you're homosexual and you come from Uganda, where there can be a death penalty for being homosexual. Now, is that a good enough source to request asylum? That's something which is debated in the courts and which we work on. The same, for example, with female genital mutilation. We were quite proud in that we were one of the first NGOs in this country to have FGM recognised as a motive for requesting asylum. It's not really enshrined in law as such, but it comes under other headings. And again, Christophe and Jean perhaps will talk about that. So it's quite restrictive, and Jean and Christophe will mention the fact, no doubt, that you have to prove individual fear. It can't be a group fear. I wanted just to spend a couple of minutes talking about the way in which things are evolving in this country and in all of Europe and in the whole world, actually. Currently, as regards migration, things are getting very difficult. There's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of polarisation, there are lots of wars and instability throughout the world, and the Belgian government is part of that situation. And so the reaction of the Belgian authorities is not always what we would like, let's say. Our work is not getting easier, it's getting harder, quite frankly. As you know, there's a rise of populism. There's a rise of racism as well, because people are frightened, people are feeling insecure. Again, we mentioned the other thing with the two poor Swedish people who were killed just a few days ago. It doesn't help relations between foreign nationals, and specifically Islam in this case, and this society. It means there's more work to do, and this is part of the current climate, which is deteriorating. Brexit didn't help, quite frankly, because Brexit, as a British national, makes me very cross, Brexit does, because Brexit fed xenophobia. It fed people's fear of people who are different. And in some ways it was all based on that. And again, it's one more straw in the wind. All these new conflicts, Sudan, Ukraine, India, you name it. I mean, just look around the world, there are more and more every day virtually. Again, it does not help the general climate whereby people are scared, and anybody who's different is a source of fear, and that's something we have to work with every day. Where were we? Food insecurity, another problem. Of course, that's more a practical, material thing than it is a philosophical thing. The aspirations by governments to outsource asylum. Now, you all know, I'm sure, about the UK system, which hasn't luckily been implemented yet, whereby migrants would be sent immediately to Rwanda to be processed, which is a crazy system in my opinion, and it's also very inhumane and very costly. But what's bad about it is that there's a social debate, but people don't really understand the fact that the British government, for example, is saying that every person who arrives in the country illegally is deemed to be a criminal. They don't have to prove it. Now, I don't know how, if you're a true refugee, if you're fleeing a war, for example, how can you arrive in a country anyway other than legally? Are you going to get a Eurostar ticket? Are you going to get on a plane? You can't do that. So obviously, any true refugee, somebody who really is afraid for their life, has to arrive illegally. So it's just a ridiculous system. And there are politicians in Belgium who I actually know who would like to do exactly the same thing, because it means that you can deal with it all offshore, and these people who come and make your society a less tidy place never actually get to set foot in the kingdom. It's a trend which I don't like. I think it's inhumane. The Australians were the pioneers in this, as you probably know. The Australians have been doing it for decades, outsourcing, offshoring asylum. And to me, that's the beginning of the end of our shared humanity. And it's something which we're always going to fight against. Governments persecuting NGOs, for example, who assist migrants in the Mediterranean. You no doubt know about the various NGOs that exist. And the Italian government, we have to understand that Italy and Greece are bearing the brunt, obviously, because they happen to be physically in the south of Europe. And therefore you can understand to an extent that they have to protect themselves. That I understand. But the way the Italian government, for example, is acting towards these NGOs with ships out trying to save people in the Mediterranean is shocking. And I think, again, it's one more part of the whole ecosystem which we have to try and improve. The extremist behaviour used by people smugglers. You've probably heard about, for example, Afghans who are fleeing Afghanistan and are taken on by people smugglers who will actually lock them up, torture them, send videos to their families and say, you must pay us a ransom to make this stop. I mean, it's talk about man's inhumanity to man. Unfortunately, it's an industry and people can make money out of it. So again, there's work to be done. And it's work to be done by everybody, because if we don't push the governments into refusing to accept this sort of behaviour, then they won't do it. That's pretty much what we need to talk about now, I think. This is not for you, it's just to show you that the migration system is very complicated, okay? That is the asylum system in Belgium. Jean-Christophe will talk a bit about it, but the point is not to actually explain it, because it's horrible, but it's very complex. It might be worth just mentioning a couple of statistics, and this thing here, sorry about this, where have we gone? This is my little squiggler thing, which is not very good. We're getting there. Right. You may be wondering, if you want to help, for example, which may be the reason you're here, maybe you're moved by what's going on, you think this is not good enough, I want to do something about this. And you may be wondering, can I do it legally? Or what risks am I running if I get involved in helping refugees? So this is basically the legislation in Belgium which covers help to migrants. Now basically what the law says is that you can provide humanitarian help. Now, that's a word which has been debated in the courts. There has been a case law on this, which Christophe and Jean could perhaps mention. Do you want to mention something about this now? Jean, tu veux, Christophe? Un de vous deux, vous voulez parler de ces articles un peu pour que les gens comprennent quels sont les dangers qu'ils peuvent courir en aidant?
À propos de...
Explique-leur un peu quelles sont les limites de ce qu'on peut faire pour aider les gens sans craindre quelque chose.
Si par exemple on offre de l'hébergement,
Jusqu'où est-ce qu'on peut aller? Si c'est bon pour aider.
Donc, par rapport à l'application de cet article qui interdit l'aide aux illégaux, il faut partir de ce que déjà fait l'Olivier, parce que l'Olivier le fait avec beaucoup de délicatesse. On ne doit pas favoriser les gens à venir, et on ne doit pas favoriser les gens à rester en clandestinité, mais leur fournir une nourriture ou bien des médicaments ou des informations pour aller se faire éventuellement se faire soigner, pour aller dans un service qui leur permet de connaître leurs droits. Tout ça, c'est permis. Mais si vous devez, par exemple, financer leur voyage pour l'utilisation de faux documents, et que vous êtes impliqué dans les faux documents, dans les vols ou les voyages, en tout cas qui ne sont pas bien en règle. On parlait par exemple des trafics, des passeurs qui s'enrichissent derrière le dos des migrants, ou qui abusent des migrants, ou qui exploitent la faiblesse des migrants, que ce soit pour venir, que ce soit pour rester en Belgique. Voilà, ça c'était un exemple. Donc l'Olivier, ce que l'Olivier fait, c'est l'écoute des personnes d'origine étrangère, pour savoir si par hasard ils n'auraient pas besoin d'aide. D'aide de première ligne, ça peut être matériel, Christophe l'a exposé, ou bien d'aide juridique, ça peut être des informations, parce qu'on a constaté souvent que la plupart de ces personnes ne savaient pas où commence et où finit leurs droits, et nous découvrons beaucoup de personnes qui ignorent qu'ils avaient droit à introduire une procédure de régularisation ou bien une procédure de santé, et même qui avaient droit sans doute à la nationalité belge, mais qu'ils l'ignoraient. Et alors, on peut commencer à les aider sur le plan juridique comme ça, ou à les orienter vers d'autres services beaucoup plus spécialisés. Il faut savoir que, par exemple, pour la traite des êtres humains, il existe des services spécialisés qui accompagnent ce genre de profil de migrants. Il existe aussi des services qui accompagnent les gens qui sont abusés dans le travail illégal. Fournir un petit job moyennant la survie ponctuellement, ce n'est pas interdit. Mais prendre une personne et l'utiliser pour 5 € par jour, et tous les jours et toutes les heures de la journée, si jamais c'est découvert, vous êtes impliqué, là, évidemment, c'est interdit. Évidemment, l'Olivier ne peut pas...
Et quelles sont les peines éventuelles qu'on encourt?
Pardon.
Quelles sont les peines éventuelles qu'on peut avoir?
Non, il y a une instruction. Il y a une instruction qui est initiée par les juges d'instruction, ça veut dire des enquêteurs du parquet et de la police. Et les sanctions peuvent varier, ça peut être des amendes, ça peut être des emprisonnements, mais les sanctions peuvent varier suivant le degré d'implication que le juge découvrira que vous êtes allé trop loin. Si vous avez gagné trop de ces personnes-là, vous risquez évidemment de...
J'ai une question. Vous avez parlé que nous pouvons donner de la nourriture et de l'aide médicamenteuse. Qu'en est-il de l'hébergement?
L'hébergement, vous pouvez héberger une personne de manière précaire. Et pendant que vous l'hébergez de manière précaire, vous pouvez vous renseigner pour une procédure pour qu'il puisse rester chez vous ou bien pour qu'il puisse avoir sa dignité. Et donc, si vous le logez un jour, une semaine, mais pendant juste le temps nécessaire pour lui trouver une solution ou un conseil, cela n'est pas interdit.
I'll give the floor back to Jean-Christophe in a minute. Don't forget, if you do need interpretation into English from French, don't hesitate to ask for a receiver from the ladies, because we want you to be able to follow what's going on completely, if possible. Just one thing about this humanitarian thing, it is obviously very relevant if you're involved in helping migrants. There was some case law when the law was first passed, and the Belgian state did in fact arrest 2 or 3 social workers who ended up going to prison, because the social workers were deemed to have helped people to arrive illegally in the country. Now, I don't remember the exact details, but basically it was like a test case where the government was showing that they weren't going to leave this legislation completely in the statute books. And it obviously caused quite a ruckus in the context where we work, where volunteers want to help refugees and asylum seekers. Since that time, I don't think there will be any cases, any high-profile cases where people were actually locked up. It could happen again. The government could choose to make an example of somebody, for example, but they haven't recently. In the current climate, it's something which might happen, who knows, but it's not happening at the moment. The word humanitarian has been interpreted by the courts as not being consistent help. So as Jean was saying, on a one-off basis. If, however, you're housing a migrant, say, for 3 years in your house, it could be deemed to be something other than humanitarian. It's a case that could be argued in the courts. What does that word mean? What is humanitarian assistance? Yeah.
Quel est le laps de temps accepté pour héberger quelqu'un?
Il n'y a pas de laps de temps. Il n'y a pas de laps de temps. Je peux vous donner une illustration. Vous accueillez un migrant, Et dans quelques jours, vous contactez un service juridique. On vous conseille qu'en trouvant tel document ou tel autre document, il peut introduire telle ou telle procédure. Vous vous mettez à la recherche, à l'aider à chercher à obtenir ces documents. Vous l'aidez bien sûr légalement à obtenir ces documents. Parce que si vous faites des échanges de passeports ou si vous utilisez des faux documents, bien sûr, c'est bien sûr interdit. Mais la personne ensuite entre dans la procédure qu'on vous a conseillée. La personne reste chez vous et vous êtes d'accord qu'il reste chez vous. Il peut rester tout le temps pendant cette procédure-là. Et cette procédure va peut-être se régler directement dans 6 mois, dans une année ou dans 3 ans. Mais si ça se règle négativement, vous avez toujours droit à introduire des recours. Pendant les recours, la personne est autorisée à rester en Belgique, donc il est autorisé à rester également chez vous. Mais tant que vous êtes toujours en train de l'aider à arriver à un résultat, vous n'êtes pas en train de soutenir l'illégalité, vous n'êtes pas dans les cas de ce qui est interdit. Voilà.
Je vois ce qui inquiète le public. Ce qui est en fait strictement interdit, ce qu'il ne peut pas faire. C'est dire par exemple, moi je me trouve ici en Europe, j'ai de l'argent, et je trouve un indigent en Afrique. Je vais lui demander de venir ici. Je lui envoie des sous, je l'aide à chercher un passeur, à trouver un billet, et puis il arrive ici. Là, c'est vraiment interdit et vous risquez gros. Voilà donc des sanctions que l'on peut imposer à la personne. Si vous êtes attrapé, ça c'est grave. Et la personne est expulsée, vous avez tout perdu et vous êtes puni vous-même. Donc, ce qui est interdit spécialement, c'est quand la personne est à l'extérieur et quand vous l'invitez à venir ici. Moi, par exemple, si je suis belge, ou si je suis en tout cas de l'Union européenne, citoyen de l'Union européenne, je peux inviter une nièce, par exemple, dans mon pays, de lui donner, de lui indiquer toutes les voies à suivre pour arriver ici. Si elle arrive sans être attrapée, ça c'est bon. Mais si on rattrape, elle risque d'être expulsée et moi aussi d'être sanctionnée. Tandis que si vous donnez de l'argent à quelqu'un ici, vous dites, bon, vous êtes pauvre, vous prenez à manger, vous prenez à boire, logez chez moi pendant un certain temps, tout ça. Et ça, ce n'est pas interdit. Mais vous n'avez pas non plus intérêt à garder cette personne pendant un mois, 2 mois, 3 mois, 4 mois, sans contacter les juristes qui peuvent l'aider. Par exemple, précisément, sans aller loin, contacter Olivier et dites à Olivier, j'ai une personne là, que dois-je faire? Et là, nous y sommes, avec notre expérience, la personne peut trouver une solution à sa question.
Yes, to echo what Christophe just said, if you have any doubts, if you have a situation where you meet a foreign national, a migrant, a refugee who is in distress, you aren't sure what to do, ask us, because that's what we're there for. And we don't want people getting into trouble. We also want to make sure that anybody who needs help gets help. And you do need some information first, because having goodwill is not always enough. Obviously, it's the basis of everything, have the right heart, but you also need information and maybe advice from specialists. Do you have a question? No. Oh, sorry. Just a few more slides, then I'll give the floor to the lawyers. This gives you an idea of how big or how small the problem, the sector is. We're talking, is that okay, Quentin? Ça va? Tu veux que je rebouge? Okay. Voilà. So, you see there are about 20,000 dossiers currently awaiting processing. One of the problems is that the system can't cope. And because the system can't cope, people fall through the cracks. So even if the system were to be very good, which quite frankly it's not. It's not working because there's too many people requesting asylum, too many people whose cases need to be dealt with, and the actual number of dossiers is getting bigger because 4,800 is what the government has called a normal workload. And the number of decisions taken per year, as you can see, is about 2,000, whereas there are about 20,000 people awaiting a decision. So something has to give somewhere. And during this time, people are generally living clandestinely. So they need even more assistance during that time. As you can see, there was a 41% acceptance rate, which is not bad actually. It used to be 10%. 41% I think is actually pretty good, quite frankly. I'm not saying Belgium is worse than anywhere else. I'm not pointing to Belgium saying it's the worst country in the world. It's not. But it's a typical European country undergoing the same problems as every other European country. They haven't yet gone for the CIRE Rwandan system, thank God, but they may well do because there are politicians who want that. You see the countries of origin, the most recent countries of origin. It's not hard to work out. Just say to yourself, where are the hotspots in the world? Where are people suffering? Where are people's houses being burnt? And just say that's where they're going to come from. Those are old figures, not so useful perhaps, but it shows you a trend. There were 19, 25, 21,000 asylum requests back 10 years ago per year. These are that's the list of the top 10 countries with the number of decisions made as regards asylum requests and the total number of decisions and the percentage rate of people who are accepted as migrants from those countries. Est-ce que pour l'instant, Jean et Christophe, il y a une liste de pays où on refuse systématiquement les demandes d'asile? Parce qu'il y avait ça. Pour l'instant, il y a ça ou non?
La dernière liste date de juillet de cette année.
Tu peux expliquer un peu le phénomène, ce que c'est cette liste?
La liste des pays d'origine sûre, c'est une liste que l'Europe et surtout la Belgique considèrent que les ressortissants de ces pays n'ont pas en principe droit à l'asile. Parce que tout va bien, on peut dire là. Le respect des droits de l'homme a atteint un standard acceptable qu'on ne peut pas venir demander asile. Mais les cas par cas sont examinés et sont examinés par les instances d'asile de manière rapidaire. Justement comme on pense que c'est pas accepté de raconter qu'on vient de tel pays et qu'on aurait de tels problèmes. On expédie ça rapidement, mais il arrive que malgré ça, même les ressortissants des pays d'origine sûrs, il peut y avoir des cas particuliers de persécution et dignes de protection. Dans la dernière liste de juillet, on peut y voir des pays que l'on peut dire que c'est de l'Europe de l'Est, sauf l'Inde. Donc parmi les pays qui ne sont pas bicontinents, il n'y a que l'Inde maintenant qui n'est pas d'origine, qui est d'une origine sûre. Donc ces pays sont Albanie, la Bosnie-Herzégovine, la République de Macédoine du Nord, le Kosovo, le Monténégro et la Serbie et l'Inde. Ça, ce sont des pays d'origine sûre. Tous les autres pays du monde peuvent venir prétendre à l'asile.
So you can see the government has various ways of responding, and of course the person I was referring to, who was a UK national, who'd been raped by her stepfather, who was pursuing her, that would be a case where the UK is obviously deemed to be a pays sûr, a safe country. But it didn't stop us acting on her behalf. She wasn't going to get asylum, but there was in fact a way of allowing her to stay in this country, which we ended up finding. These are EU statistics. You've probably heard about these in the press. So 2 million arrivals, basically, of people in European countries. 1 million departures, so net migration is 1 million coming in. 966,000 international protection applications, so it's gone up by 50% compared to 2021, logically, because the world is a mess, as you're all aware. 150,000 approvals, so that means 15% of those who asked for international protection EU-wide were granted that protection. It's not massive. Now, 100,000 people were awarded subsidiary protection, and maybe I could ask Jean or Christophe to talk about subsidiary protection, to explain what that is. Expliquer ce que c'est que la protection subsidiaire.